All right, I have with me today Danny Harper, who's no better person to talk to about jazz music. And we're going to talk about whatever comes to mind about jazz, but definitely the topic I think would be why jazz music is the greatest genre of music. We'll keep that as kind of the backdrop, but we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff because you've got a lot of experience playing jazz and hanging out with all the jazz greats. So thanks for coming by.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you for the opportunity to be able
Yeah.
to express myself about my personal opinions and feelings toward this music. And any particular questions?
Well, I mean, I've only talked to you briefly out at the jam session, so that's obviously where I know you from, and I got to hear some stories and things like that. But I definitely want to hear about how you got into jazz, like because you have a very musical family. A lot of your different people in your family played music, right?
Right, but dealing with instruments, that more or less started with me, that I kind of passed on to my siblings. At one point, I had almost everybody in my family tinkering on the instrument, which you might call my nuclear family, and all my siblings. But however, whether they give me credit for it or not, we had a lot of people within our family that just enjoyed the music like yourself. I had an uncle that spent some time in service, and he was a really big jazz buff. And he was really funny about his albums. He didn't believe in playing vinyl too often. So he would buy all these great records, keep them in mint condition, and just recorded them on reel to reel
Oh, interesting.
for parties and things like that. And I learned about a lot of different players through him, a lot of great singers through him. He was fond of singers like Helen Merrill, Chris Connor. So I knew about these vocalists before I got to know about Sarah Vaughan real good. But later on, I would talk to Sarah Vaughan almost nightly when we were both working the Blue Note at the same time, which is a gig that I inherited from my brother. He started there first. A lot of times that was during the time he was in the Blakey band. And so I would cover nights he couldn't make. And that was a wonderful experience because I got to talk to Sarah Vaughan, Carmen McRae, Billy Eckstein, Art Farmer, Benny
Wow.
Golson, Clark Terry, Freddie Hubbard, Donald Byrd, Maynard Ferguson, all these type of guys.
What about Sarah Vaughan? How was she? I mean,
Sarah ranks among my favorites
It's one of my
because
favorites.
of her. Musicians get in the habit of almost not respecting vocalists, horn players and stuff. But I believe a good horn player, if he's playing a ballad, should not only know the melody, but know the lyrics. It's something about knowing the lyrics that help you bring out the true reference and identity of the tune.
Even as an instrumentalist, no one does.
Yeah, and some of the great older horn players I had a chance to be around always encouraged that know the words as well as the notes, and getting a chance to hang around some of these great singers, kind of put an extra feather in my cap about paying attention to that, and it's just a beautiful art form, and I try to pass that on to a lot of young horn players coming up, know the melody, know the lyrics, this kind of thing. So this is usually what my buddies here in Birmingham try to do too when younger players come out, is remind them that the melody is important. It's a way to keep up with the length of the tune and know where you are all the time while you're playing the tune. And but the secret about Sarah Vaughan to me, part of her greatness lied in the fact that she wasn't just a vocalist, she was also a musician.
Mm-hmm.
She played the piano very well.
Right.
You know, one night I coaxed into playing the piano at the front. I said, you know, I'd love to hear you on, because I had heard it in the past on records. And she said, oh, sweetheart, don't make me do that. Don't talk me into that, because I haven't played in a long time. I said, you be fine. I know you'll be fine. You play your chords and say, you know, I just love to hear at least one number. So for me, she did that. And I couldn't believe how much, and it sounded good, you know. But she was beating herself up because she couldn't do the things she was used to doing. You know?
Right.
And, you know, I shouldn't have done that. I said, don't be so hard on yourself. You know, I mean, if you haven't played, I mean, just to see you at the piano, just, you don't know how much good it
Yeah, that's awesome.
You know, because as I work or try to help a lot of vocalists, I keep telling all musicians, even if you play guitar, and you know guitar is a chord instrument,
Mm-hmm.
it's still good to play the piano, because the piano is a better visualization of intervals, the distance from one note to another, and chords and all that, you know.
Yeah,
Duke Ellington himself at one time defined the piano as a portable orchestra. So when we think about music, even if we think about classical, I don't want to get too caught up in what's greater than another, but let's look at classical for a minute and its merits. If I was to ask the average person about a great classical musician, I wouldn't hear the names of anybody in a symphony.
right.
That would be rare. I'm just talking about the average layman who enjoys the music.
Right.
They would all quote to me what? The composer.
Usually.
I'd get answers like Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven, maybe Stravinsky or somebody like this, you know. So that means what? That the real creators of that music happens to be the composers, not the musicians. And when we think about jazz, we know how creative it is upon each musician to be able to add something to the fold. One of the greatest democratic art forms on the planet. That's what I really say.
Right.
See? So if you're looking for greatness, that's the first thing I like to point out. This democracy among the musicians to take turns, encourage each other to do their best when they take a solo. Plus the fact we all as musicians study the same theory. So why isn't by now an opportunity for the classical musicians to play creatively?
Right. And there's talk about that maybe back in the day some of the classical musicians were able to improvise a little bit perhaps, but never to the extent of what we have in jazz, and never conversations among multiple people.
Right.
If there's any improvisation, it's usually the lead person, right?
Right.
Or whoever
Or somebody dressing up a cadenza or something like that, but it's not as extensive as it is in jazz. And in fact, I had a debate with a colleague, and because I'm used to making that statement boldly that jazz is the greatest music on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had trouble out of some of my colleagues. They were like, what? Greater than this, greater than that? I said, please understand me. Read my lips if you have to. It's the greatest music in the world. Because it's incumbent upon each musician to understand theory and harmony well enough to know how to be melodic as they play. Now that doesn't hold true for every jazz musician, because after a while we get influenced by all kinds of things. In fact, jazz is I'm almost looking for another word, because jazz has come to mean anybody that might take a solo. Well, they take solos in folk music.
Right. Rock music, blues music.
Right. So that doesn't mean it's jazz.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Because at that point, you'd be void of dealing with some of the concepts of the language, you know. And jazz is more organized than I think most classical musicians even know. You know, there's certain connecting devices that musicians use all the time. I was very elated to see a young man from Hoover who attended the Jazz Hall of Fame, where I teach on Saturdays, use a device that I call Four, and which I got from Barry Harris. And it was actually a device I was going to use next to lengthen the line, but I made up this line and gave it to him, you know, like a fraction at a time. And that same device was where I was going to go. And this guy completed my thought, young high school student. And when he played it, I said, now look at that. I said, do you know what that's called, that last figure you added on to my line? He says, no, I don't. I just heard Sonny Rollins do it somewhere, you know. So I said, well, that's called Four. And I said, and the reason it's called Four, because you'll skip in that, you know, basically we set up a scale. So at that point in the scale, he put in the device Four, which was like if we're in the key of C, G going to F, which is 4 of C, skip to D, and chromatically come back up to E so you can land on the third of the next chord.
Okay.
But it's almost like a figure on 5 going to 1. So it's G, F, skip down to D, and when you think about the overall key, you arriving at the third of C. You know,
interesting. Yeah.
And he says, "Oh man, okay, I didn't know that."
I really think about what he was doing, but he knew, just by hearing it.
He heard it on records, right? You know, and the mere fact that he felt so strongly about the line to learn it, so he could just put it anywhere, was amazing. You know, and that's the way a lot of us start out, whether we know the system of the music or not. But there's structure. And a lot of people think jazz, anything you want to do, any kind of run you want to play.
Right.
You know.
That come from that idea. I think it's something interesting to talk about is what, and I don't think there's maybe an absolute answer because it's always people have different opinions, but what is jazz? Because if you go back to the early guys, King Oliver, Louis Armstrong, when Charlie Parker came along, those guys, they were like, man, that ain't really jazz, right? Because they thought they weren't.
That way.
And then eventually they kind of came around, and then you had those guys and the hard bop guys, and then all of a sudden you get Ornette Coleman, you get these guys that start going further out. You get free jazz. Cecil Taylor, I listened to a record the other day of that, and I couldn't understand what he was doing. So what is jazz?
Well,
you know what? Or is there a definitive definition of what jazz is? It changes, right?
Well, we do have, like you said, it's like different genres of music now because we have people going in different directions. But if I feel like if you want to be considered a good jazz player, I think that's another reason why Wynton Marsalis gets so much praise because, I mean, look where he's grown up.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right in the heart of it.
Right in the heart of New Orleans music, and that's still valid. That's you know, I mean, you can play that, you know, you can play, you know, and he endures that, and that's representative of where he was born and grew up. You know, when you go to another place, you take New York, that has become popular for bebop, post-bop at its highest point. Why? Because there were so many clubs and sessions around when bebop was in its heyday, you know, and, you know, guys shared with each other as they played and helped each other out. But that was at one point, New York was the place to be for everybody to participate in that.
It still seems to be
Yeah.
kind of like that.
Well,
A lot of these people I
it's-
talked to, they said that New Yorkers were still most of the stuff is happening in the U.S. Really. But-
Yeah, well, it is, I guess. But it's changing up on us. I don't think you have to be in New York to get your name out there. You know, if you got some good recording studios, which seems to be popping up in various places now.
Around the world too. Europe is a lot of stuff going on in Europe.
Yeah,
too.
it is, you know. And, you know, so these changes will have some overall effect. But I wouldn't try to pigeonhole jazz into just one thing. But I feel if you want to be considered a good jazz musician, you're going to try to go back as far as you can with all the styles, whether you are great at playing all of them or not.
Mm.
But I don't think we should be going backward. You know what I mean by that? New Orleans had its day. There's some innovation since then that I know, as I hear a lot of young players coming out, they all sound great to me technically, because that's become the pinnacle. Everybody's so into having such a sound that it captures everybody right away. But beyond just a good tone, I can still hear ideas and what's being played and how it's being approached, because I understand the system. So I could listen to the same piece you might listen to, and you might be enthralled with how perfect tone or intonation might be from point to point. But what I'm sitting up here hearing is how slick is the connection and the idea, and how much melody is involved in the overall thing, rather than just one aspect, the technical aspect. Because guys now, like you talking about people playing free, you know, you look at all these guys, and I've run into some free players that was interesting, yet I don't want to call any names when I talk like this, but there's a guy that left Atlanta before I moved to Atlanta and blew up big time, you know, as a free player. And I caught him trying to participate in a regular jam session. And I was looking, I didn't want to be rude or anything, but I almost wanted to ask him, how did you get your name out like that?
Couldn't do it.
Nothing was working. No, I said, that's amazing, you know, because there was so many fundamental things the guy didn't have together. But he was a notable free player.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because like a lot of the people say you have to know the rules before you can break the rules, right? So you got to have some foundation in the basics before
should. I'd like to see that you do,
right.
me personally, but that's the school I came from.
Right.
Yeah, but not everybody has that.
Right.
And not everybody in the audience is astute enough to have that kind of concept to evaluate either. You know.
You're being the jazz theory, so I mean, you teach theory.
Yes.
And you teach that.
Right.
So talk a little bit about that, about the importance of learning theory versus. I mean, there's a lot of great players that have learned by ear, like you were talking about. Some people can, you know, especially a lot of the old guys that grew up on the street, they learned the music on the street, and a lot of them weren't very educated. Then you have a lot of ones that were very well educated or gradually grew into it, right? Well, they played and then they learned from somebody else.
Well, I tell you, my first turn on with jazz to hear some unknown players was hanging with my dad, who was a photographer. And he had all kinds of friends. And he would take me by a spot where guys got together and just jam. And I got to see some of these guys get together and share things with each other, but most of these guys at one point in their life were hobos, just catching trains from one city to another. And this particular group I'm talking about settled down in Baltimore near the harbor. And they played at the harbor a lot in Baltimore, Maryland. And they had all kinds of hustles just to survive. So one of their hustles was selling alcohol after hours. You know what I mean? But in between time, they were down there educating themselves with not just music, all kinds of books, so they, in an effort to round themselves out and be able to have conversations with people that came to hear them play if they were on gigs or whatnot, but they came off just like they had received master and doctoral degrees or something, but they knew what they were doing, and they studied that hard at it. But they still had good ears. And what I find myself doing, as big as I am on theory, I still try to go through some training to keep my ears up. Sometimes you can just go to a piano and play two notes and try to guess at what intervals you might have, so just an array of different little exercises you can do to keep your ears tuned up too. I've developed my own way of dealing with scales after sitting up under Barry Harris, who feels like there's a way that you can do a scale study to almost be like a piano player just playing chords to hear the sound of the entire song. I have students do scales like that, up and down, as he did, and these things are quite helpful, so at least the student is aware of all the notes that's available to them. And then when they get that fundamental thing down, then they can study the relationships of notes and scales. One thing that I don't think gets taught early enough in music because of this Western system, the way we study music, a 7-note scale system is basically incomplete.
Why do you say that?
Because you don't have all your possible passing tones. So the mere fact that you tell somebody, see, we have people that'll run with a little bit before they explore everything. I wasn't a real good student in school because I used to always challenge all my teachers from elementary school up. I didn't take, of course, the teachers in authority, but I didn't look at it like that, My thing was, well, why? And I've taught my students to always ask that, challenge me with that. Why would you have me do this? What makes this work? Why does it work? Why? Back to that. So, what I mean by that is that when you're looking at something, you have to see relationships and all types of things. And we have certain keys that's related to each other. So you could be in C and might move to E flat major. It's a reason why E flat major is so easily to access from C major. Or why F sharp major is so easily able to be accessed from E flat major. Or why A major is so easily to be accessed from F sharp major. And what makes all of them related. Now see, I said C, E flat, F sharp, and A. Now, an astute musician would know that it's a fully diminished chord. So it's the diminished chord in tonal music that brings everything together in relationships. So those people, like the problem I have with some of my musical colleagues, though I don't have a doctoral degree, but I'd argue, I've been in debates with teachers with doctoral degrees and left them thinking about stuff. You know, for example, we say our relative major to C is A minor.
Mm-hmm. That's the way I think.
Okay, well, which A minor?
Okay, explain.
What A minor
For
do
me-
you think is related to?
For me, well. I mean, I'm a old rock blues player, so when I think of playing C and I go into the A minor, then I can play out of anything out of that A minor pentatonic. So it's very, very
Well, pentatonic.
into that,
Well, does it
which
have
just
to
comes
be
out of the minor chord, well, of the pattern.
a pattern?
So-
Okay. Well, what about just? Are you still in the key of C? Or are you really in the A minor?
Well,
What makes the difference?
Exactly. So I was always taught that wherever the tune rests at is what key it's really in.
Okay. So if we're gonna rest on A minor, what kind of A minor will you play
Well, on the guitar,
to get that on the guitar?
it would be where I think that the right
Would you
voicing
use-
is for the tune.
Well,
So
what would that
it could
be?
be an open,
Open what?
open chord.
Like
or I could
what?
play a bar chord.
I want a specific chord.
Well, it'd be A minor,
A minor what?
just A minor.
Try it.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Okay.
Well, it depends on. See, I don't even. I think about just the sound I'm playing. So if I want to get a different tone, I play it higher up on the neck, bar chord, or even further up the neck, triad, or down as an open, where you'll get an extra note, right? Open.
Well, see, this is what I
So-
find musicians do. They'll play A minor, think it's restful, but they'll use A minor 7. But that's the wrong A minor.
When A minor 7, I would use that in a more of the blues. If it's a real blues, and that depends if it's rock based blues or the old time blues. If you're going to listen to Robert Johnson or something, they'll use a lot of the 7 chords, right? It'll be
Well, right now, I'm just talking
But-
about minor.
just minor,
Just minor.
yeah. So explain. So tell me kind of what's missing there.
I tell you what's missing. How can, if we thinking about the key of C, and we say A is related to that, the only thing that proves they're related to me is the fact that it's either 6 or minor third distance above or below. So A can be a 6 away, but if you take it down an octave, it's a minor third below C. So there's our diminished thing once again. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the difference. I've witnessed a lot of up and coming young musicians in jazz, and this is a big no-no, trying to end the minor with a minor 7, because they'll see that in a fake book, but that's totally incorrect.
Interesting.
Totally incorrect.
You think it sounds wrong when they play it?
does. You know, but they think, well, it sounds all right to me.
Right.
Like I had a musician who's teaching over at UAB tell me, well, it sounds right to me. I said, well, I feel sorry for you. I guess you had messed up your ears. And I said, excuse me for interrupting you. And I walked out the room. He runs me down. You got to explain to me why you say that's wrong. I said, because it doesn't sound restful. A minor 7 chord, whenever you use it, is going to always sound like it needs to resolve the
Right.
7 to 6. So it can be played like a dominant. So if you got a minor 7, you expect A minor 7 to go to D7, right? When you go to D7, you don't have to do much. You can let the G go to F sharp, and then what you've got is A, C, E, F sharp, And that's going to sound like D7. You don't even have to put D in the bass or on the piano. It's resolved.
Mm-hmm.
And that's at the same token, you play that for your A minor as being 1. That's going to sound more restful than A, C, E, G. So really what you do, you go to the major and you flatten your third. But what I try to teach people is that chords come from scales. So if we got a 2-5-1 in minor, which in my mind, this is just my opinion, I don't know if Barry would say this or not, but I'll hold firm to it. The only real 2-5-1 is if you have to use a couple of different scales. So in major, if I have a student doing a quick 2-5-1, 2 beats apiece, I tell them just play the second chord, play the dominant, because that's the overall sound. And if you want to, if it's a measured piece, he can still play from the dominant up and down. You see?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to play a 2-5-1 in minor, your first chord would be like a half diminished 2. Okay? Then you have to go to a dominant like E7. So your half diminished 2, if it's we in A minor, is going to be B half diminished. Some people say use Locrian with a raised 2 and all this kind of stuff. Well, the early jazz musicians didn't deal with modes so much.
Mm-hmm.
Their thing was be able to play a scale from any point and know how to resolve. So basically, this is a knockout for some people. If you can train yourself to play from 1 and play from 5, like they're 2 separate scales, and learn how to enhance that, you can play the heck out of most chord progressions.
And you're playing basically 2 modes.
But we don't think of it like modes. It's a choice of whether I want to play from 1 or from 5.
Yeah, because you can play. Yeah, and then you can play from different places in any scale, and
right.
Which they would call modes because you're kind of you get a different.
Well, modes is so archaic. You taking me back to.
That's how I learned too, the modes. You got and then
but
and how you start and you get the different sound. You can almost an Arabian sound if you play on that kind of thing. But
that's where a lot of people have gone, and it's fine. But then sometimes you get a simple tune, a beautiful ballad or something, and it's like they don't play it quite as well.
Yeah. Well, it's got to be what's in that's another thing. You learn all the theory, then you've got what's in your head that you want to play, that you hear, right, to make whatever conversation you're having or how you're going to express yourself on the instrument for that particular song, right? So how does the theory, because theory, that's explaining what you're playing, why you're playing what you're playing, right? The theory is an explanation of it. But as far as what your creative mind might be saying, you're like, well, I'm going to make this
a little different or something like that.
Yeah,
there's some avenues to do that. But I guess back to the European scale,
yes,
for the way we practice it here in the West, is that, we leave the average person with the idea that there are 12 different diminished chords. That's what I'm really after, about straightening people out. There are not 12 different. There are 12 different diminished triads, but they're not 12 different diminished chords. It's only 3 different diminished chords.
Okay.
Fully diminished. And each one has 4 names. 3 times 4 is your 12.
Well, interesting. Yeah, I didn't think of it that way either. And I'm not, my theory is not, I'm not very, enough to get myself in trouble. So I'm not an expert on theory by any means, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to teaching the jazz students now, you have that kind of system in place that you're teaching. It's a little bit different.
It's because I have worked on piano well enough to substitute for piano players that got scarfed up by some other more popular musician than my brothers, who needed a piano player. And they, at one time, didn't know I was working away from them so hard on the piano. Because I moved out the house before they did. You know, they're close in age, my two younger brothers. So I was working on my own, but still giving them advice anytime they asked for it. You know, like, you gonna be in New York, get with Barry Harris, study with him. If you're looking to put a band together, grab Benny Green, because I was in New York before they were, just to sharpen up my skills. I wasn't going there trying to be famous right away. I was going there trying to get to information that I knew I couldn't get to in the South, you know. So those were kind of tips I was handing them. But back to my diminished chord, what I'm trying to say is, from the way we teach Western music here, is that we don't investigate using extra notes in our scale, like the flatted six, which is passing tone. Now, Barry Harris, for those trying to understand his method, calls this the six diminished scale. But all those guys still got, including Barry, got that from Charlie Parker. Okay? Mm-hmm. So the six diminished scale is a good way to know whether or not you playing the right, that you have all the tones in the scale to figure out your principal chord that's going to be fully at rest. And so the six diminished means a six chord plus being alternated with a diminished, which is all your passing tones. So the way I teach my basic theory, I start with that scale first, rather than the, because chances are if a student is going to school, he's already learned the regular major scale. Mm-hmm. So if he wants to play jazz, that's the first scale I introduce to him, so he can understand what's at hand to make music sound good. That's really the control of consonance and dissonance, controlling contrast. And music is one of those art forms that's very symmetrical. Once you're doing something that doesn't have symmetry, you got to do a little extra work to make it work out. That's why jazz is complicated for some professional musicians who might play classical. The reason they can't play jazz because all this is not in their mind. But it might be in the composer's mind. Because in answer to Barry's thing, I've had somebody do some research. They said, well, that can't be the first time this is thought of. No, Barry wouldn't tell you that. And Parker probably didn't think of it first either. But I've had people do research and come up with the fact that Bartok had something similar. You see? So jazz musicians always study everything. They study classical pieces. In fact, one of my college instructors almost cried when she said, what are you going to do when you leave here? And this was me finishing up my undergrad degree, but I had dropped out of school for 20-something years and came back and told her I was going to probably be the best student she ever had with voice leaving and all that kind of stuff. And she said, in fact, when I came back, I skipped courses. Because guess what? I didn't drop out and just sit on the couch watching TV. I dropped out, started playing more, practicing more, And I was just as busy as if I was still in school. So when I came back playing some of the stuff I was playing on the piano player said, "Oh man, that's beautiful. I can't do that. I don't even know how to play chords like that. How many classes you want to skip?" I said, "Can I skip all of them?" "Yeah, you can take testimony." So that's the way that went down.
Wow.
You know,
That's
I said, "No, I'll take a couple just to work on my reading some." It's a good thing I did, because when I decided to just test out, I was able to take the test. I had to transpose a piece. I had to play 2 classical pieces from memory on the piano and all that. Eventually, when I played Japan, that was a gig I was in charge of the musicians for. We only took, I guess it was 3 of us, a singer, bass, and piano. And I was the piano player every night. And so I had played that much piano in my time, and we had a great time. But once again, I also have to credit a guy who forced me to sit at the piano. That was Tommy Stewart. He says, when I went to take a lesson with him one time, he said, "This is where it's at." He said, "Those 3 buttons, I know you like what you heard me do the other night, but I have something else on my mind when I play. I understand the context of the tune, the chords of the tune." But I looked at him at first. I said, "What you do?" I said, "I got my horn." He said, "I see you got it out the case. I didn't tell you to take it out the case." He said, "I want you to sit right here first." "I didn't come here to play no piano." He said, "I know you did." He said,
But this is where you're going to learn. And you notice all the major players, the great players, they play piano, at least to some extent.
Same thing for composers, as we were talking about earlier,
right.
The classical regime.
Right.
Who do you know that's writing that doesn't play piano?
Right, yeah.
Can't name one.
No.
Yeah.
So when it comes to sight reading, this is something I wanted to ask, because when it comes to classical music, right, you have to be able to sight read, and you have to be able to do it well.
It, but let's be real about that. Is it really such a thing as sight reading? Looking at something you've never played before?
I mean, some people can do it, right? Some people are very good at it.
Nobody can do it. I say nobody can do it. They play what they've been hearing.
So if you put down a piece that nobody knows, and one of these people that's very good at sight reading, I
tell you what you do.
Some of the students,
I've seen this done.
Yeah.
Sam Rivers came to University of Georgia while I was there as a student, and I was so happy to see him say it, because they were real big on sight reading. Well, I've heard that even some of the greatest jazz musicians, believe it or not, weren't necessarily great sight readers.
Right, yeah.
And there's a film I wish I could get a hold of that somebody did about some of the top white singers that had gigs all over the country playing. Some of them did not want to go on stage playing if they ran into a union that bought them all white musicians. They wouldn't go on stage until they had a certain amount of black musicians in the band. And the complaint was, well, they don't sight read as fast. Yeah, but when they get the feel of it, they got the best feel. So if I don't have 6 or 7 black musicians in this band, when I come back, the show won't go on.
Doesn't have the same feel to it.
Right.
Interesting.
And I hate I didn't take that off of TV, because I think by then VCRs were out. Why I didn't tape it, I don't know. But I think I got so enthralled just checking that out that, I wound up watching the whole show and went off. I should have tried to find out where I could have gotten a copy. But I think that's a very important thing for people to know. But Sam came to University of Georgia and got on stage and said, now, he said, I know people are big on sight reading, but there's no such thing as sight reading. Everybody got quiet and go, what do you mean there's no such thing as sight reading? He said, now, If you don't believe me, it's, I'm sure we have some people in teachers there and students. I'm sure we got some people here that think they're very good sight readers. He says, now, I'm going to pull out this John Coltrane solo on such and so. And if I got any volunteers want to come up here and sight read this, you're welcome to come. And then I'm going to play the recording after you play.
Interesting, yeah.
Do I have any takers? I didn't see nobody put up their hand.
No, nobody? Nobody did it?
Nobody.
And is that something you can even write on? Is that,
It was all written out. Yeah.
To what you can...
So if they don't know the style, if they haven't heard it, haven't been practicing, they can't play.
Right.
You dig?
Yeah. So as important as it is to look in a ring, or if you're going to go into a studio as a session musician or something like that, and they throw it up there, you at least have to have a familiarity of what you're going for. In order to be able to.
And that's why you get some musicians that get called first above others.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you know somebody that already plays that style, what you going to do? I need a trumpet player to do it. You're going to say, well, get so-and-so.
Right. That's why those guys get all the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's everybody's conception of who does what well. Yeah.
And who plays well with others. There's a lot of people that have a good, that play together well. A group of musicians, you'll see them, like if you go even today, you'll see a lot of the same musicians play together because they know how to converse with one another musically. And you get that.
Blakey said that to me one time, because I was also interested in auditioning for the band. And believe it or not, at the time it ticked me off. But, I always stood up for myself, so I was young, abrasive. It didn't matter to me whether, I always wanted you to treat me like a human being with equal respect.
Mm.
Whether I could play well to you or not, I'm still a person.
Right.
And that's been one of my goals and ideals for myself, is that I'm a man first and a musician later. So if you're going to talk to me, you're going to give me a certain amount of respect. Mm-hmm. So when I first met Freddie Hubbard, wanted him to autograph an album, he came off like, is he some sort of groupie? And everybody laughing and shit. So I said, well, no, not a groupie. I put my pants on like I hope you put yours on. I said, but you did write every tune on the album. If you're ashamed of it, I don't want to bother you with it, but I happen to like it. I said, why you coming off like you coming off, I don't understand, because I know between you and I that you know that I know you ain't playing as much trumpet as Dizzy Gillespie. You do know that, don't you? Then next thing you know, he snatches the album out of my hand. Thank you very much, Freddie Hubbard. I'm staying at such and such a hotel. I want you to bring your horn by and see me tomorrow at 10 o'clock. So it wasn't just tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Next thing I knew, I had a week-long lesson with Freddie Hubbard.
Wow. What are some of the nuggets of wisdom you got from him? I mean,
well, he got on me about, still working. I think he knew I had good ideas, but he was still on me about, being in better control of my wind flow and all that, working on bell tones and, trying to get the horn to ring more, that kind of thing. But it was truly more technical than, I didn't get as much from Freddie about jazz theory as I did, per se, Donald Byrd, who heard me one time and was like, he had a book he never published. I know this to be a fact because of our association with each other. Because when he heard me in Atlanta, I was already playing some of the stuff he had in his book. I was off on my own personal innovation, you know. And he was like, I don't believe I come to the South and hear somebody like you playing like that. He said, can you take a tip of advice? I said, sure. Coming from you, you'd be welcome. He said, well, I want you to work on bebop a little harder. Really try to discover what that's more about. He said, because you can always come back to this. You know, you got the right approach to this. He said, but I still want to hear bebop in your playing because that's the gateway to modern jazz.
Mm.
You know, so that's how important bebop has been to the boppers. You know.
Right.
You know, because they've already gone through that whole thing of understanding how important the diminish is in a relationship of things, the contrast of certain things. So the chromatic scale, let's take that for to give some people a good idea about how we should think about music. How many different notes does a student have to learn to know all his notes on his instrument? 12.
12 notes, yeah.
Okay. Divide that by 2, what do we get? 2 scales of how many notes?
We got 6. So
Right. So that'll be your 2 whole tone scales. Divide that by 2, what do you get?
3.
3 sets of 2 notes apiece. So that'll be 3 steps between those. So from C to F sharp, from D to A flat, E to B flat. Those are all tritones. See?
Mm.
And when we do C sharp, we get C sharp to G, D sharp to A, or E flat to A, F to B, and now to get our diminished chords, you have to mix the pairs. That's where the fully diminished chord comes from.
Interesting, yeah. Interesting way to think about it.
Yeah. Bebop players knew this back in the years, because after a while, when they used to play 1 and 7 in the left hand of the pianos to like 1 and 3. But that 1 and 3 needed some more attention, but it sounded a little bland. So they, knowing that minor goes to dominant, they started using a tritone in the left hand. But it's a gradual, you go back and listen to your bebop recordings, it was a gradual movement with guys that were the strongest bebop players at that time, most especially Bud Powell, because he played with Bird a lot. He was, in his mind, he was going to be Bird at the piano.
Yeah. And then where does so you hear a lot now about the bebop scale.
Well,
And what?
the beboppers don't call it the bebop scale.
Yeah. But now
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So, I've got a friend here in Birmingham who he loves to call it the major bebop scale. I said, well, there's really no such thing. I said, first place, we call that scale 6 diminished. Because when you break it down at the piano, it's the only way you can harmonize the major scale, because you're using all possible passing tones. So if I want to harmonize C major scale, I go E, G, A, C, keep the melody at the top. Then I have to move to F, A flat, B, D. D comes after C. Then I got to move to G, A, C, E. And to facilitate F being at the top, I got to do it A flat, B, D, F. So what black note am I using with my C major scale? A flat all the time.
Interesting.
That's a passing tone.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So that's kind of what you're teaching these young kids.
Early.
Early. So
because I've run into older players that's been around here for a long time And they play well, I don't look at this as I'm not into bashing other players for what they do, because, I like what people come up with on their own sometimes, so I don't exclude. I can listen to, who's the piano player you mentioned?
Cecil Taylor.
Cecil Taylor. I can listen to Cecil Taylor and enjoy it. I can't listen to it for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I can listen to it and say, oh man, look at this rhythm. It's something I find interesting in almost everything.
Right.
And I think that's being open,
Right.
And I'd be telling a lie if I told somebody I didn't like classical music. It wouldn't be the truth, I wouldn't have studied from so many classical players as I have. And I got some of them that are dear friends of mine, whether they can improvise or not.
Mm-hmm.
I met some, very beautiful guys that it's all about sharing, even in the classical vein. I'm not going to say everybody is like that.
Right.
Because I've experienced some that kind of hold back, like they're scared they're going to give you too much.
Right, like it's, yeah.
But,
who did you,
each his own.
Yeah, who did you think were the most open jazz guys that you ran into that were really helpful, that were really excited to share things? I know you've heard things from some people weren't so, legends that were more standoffish. Some of them you had to really go ask. Some of them were open to sharing. Who were the ones that you just found that were really helpful that you ran into?
Let's see if I can think about some. Donald Byrd was the most helpful of horn players I know. Also, Art Farmer.
Mm.
And I've always loved Art, and we got along when we met, just like that. Benny Golson was very nice. Oh, I enjoyed talking to Benny. And he's gone now, Miles was interested in talking to me one-on-one. He just happened by one of my gigs and came and sat down and listened. And he called like Vernon Jordan's brother, Windsor Jordan. They're all from Atlanta, Man, there's a guy playing downtown, a young guy too, man. He's all deep in the bebop. I want you to go down there and find out who he is. And Windsor, I think, told him, because Windsor didn't like me. He didn't know it was me down there anyway. So he said, who's this young guy you talking about, man? I ain't never heard of the guy. He said, just go down to such and such. He said, Miles, it's 12 o'clock. You can't do this for me. So he comes in, he had bedroom shoes, house coat, and then he proceeds to just lay me out, Man, you don't know Miles when you see him? I said, what is it you trying to tell me exactly? Man, Miles Davis came in here. Why didn't you say something to him? I said, how am I supposed to know Miles came in here? This is my gig. I said, I'm playing for the people in here. I said, I don't know what you talking about. You telling me Miles came in here? He said he sat in the back near the door and he listened to you and he wanted me to come down here and find out who the hell you are. You should have said something to him. I said, look, if Miles wanted to meet me, he should have stayed around and walked up to me after I got through playing. Then we would have gotten to know each other. I said, other than that, I don't give a damn who was in here. Oh, he was livid. He looked at me, who do you think you are? So, I don't know that he was in here.
Yeah,
That's the only thing I'll tell you.
Yeah.
But later on, when I met him, when I went to his show, he remembered me and called me to the dressing room and told his doorman, don't let it, man, I've been wanting to talk to this young man. Don't let nobody else in here. But when I told some other guys in Atlanta that, he had come to the gig evidently, They said, well, did you talk? I said, I didn't even see it.
Mm-hmm.
So they all had doubts. Fat chance doubts. You know. But we didn't talk about music so much, not on the theoretic level, but just about direction and, you know, like Miles likes to talk, you know, almost aesthetically about music. I found that to be interesting, just as well as knowing the theory.
Yeah.
You know, how you want to express yourself, how you want to come off. And we talked about a guy who's redefined himself through his lifetime.
Like I said, there's 5 different Mileses. If you look, I mean, really, you got the early Miles, bebop Miles, hard bop Miles. You go into
Cool,
fusion Miles, cool.
that.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's incredible.
It is, indeed. So I have a lot of respect for him. And of course, technically, he doesn't sound the same every time. But I think we're moving in a position, maybe technology has something to do with it, I'm not sure. But we're moving in a position where we don't respect creativity enough, you know, or true artistry enough, you know. We're looking for everything to be too perfect, you know, and that shouldn't be it either. And let somebody tell the truth about life. Everything in hunky-dory from beginning to end.
You're right. Yeah, yeah. A lot of hard times and trials. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So you got all the different art. So when it comes to there's a lot of great players now. I think there's a lot of great jazz albums coming out that are new. They're straight ahead jazz guys. I mean, you've got a lot of great players. There's, you even had some people that are like Wynton or Branford Marsalis just did a Keith Jarrett record that I thought was fantastic. What do you see as the future of jazz with these young people coming up now? Because you know we have the jam session here in Birmingham, which is wonderful. You know, and I think Jose, he runs a pretty tight ship there. He makes, you know, if you don't know the tune, he'll you know, he's nice about it. But what do you think about the future of jazz as far as what's coming up now and its continuation, because it has to be handed down if it's going to be, you know, as much as we love I always say, as much as we love all the old guys, we love all the legends and all the stuff we listen to, if that's all we listen to, if that's all that there is, it's going to die. You have to have some people that are learning that and moving on and coming up with new things.
Yeah, but
so
that
otherwise
depends
it'll be
upon
gone.
how well organized the new things are. Just because they're new don't mean that they are on the same level as the old things necessarily. And then what can we take from the old things? And we should be looking at that and maybe using them different ways.
Right.
Or transforming them somehow, or at the very least, because if it was great as we think it is, should we throw it away?
Well, it's true, but there has to be. I think some. I guess the term evolve is not really the right word, but it has to keep growing. I think otherwise we'd still be playing.
Well, it can't still grow.
Yeah, but we'd be playing the same style Louis Armstrong played if you didn't have Troy Parker and Diz come along and shake things up, and you wouldn't have the fusion side of stuff if you didn't have Miles and those guys come and do that kind of. And I think, you know, there's some people that would say that ain't jazz once it gets out to a certain place, but.
Well, I tell you, and this is something I hadn't shared with too many people. I heard Barry Harris in an interview on TV. And I don't think I had made it to middle school yet. I was still in elementary school. But he had just finished doing a performance, and then they talked to him about bebop. And bebop never bebop was very short-lived.
Yeah, it
what
was.
people know about. See, that's what scares me, that I don't think, everybody's looking at move on, move on. But have we really gotten all we can get out of bebop? I'm not so sure.
Because bebop basically had basically the hard bop guys that came on the one side and kind of had the West Coast cool guys that came in then.
Yeah, so keeping that in mind, Barry, as he was beginning to forge different directions and ideas, mentioned how committed he was to just dealing with bebop, trying to take it further. He says, so much to this that I'm willing to tell you, the audience, that I'm a bebop musician forever and a day. And I thought to myself, that's a prison sentence.
That's it. That's all you're going to be stuck in.
Forever and a day.
He must have saw some. He must have been like, there's endless possibilities just there, which.
But he said it with so much authority.
Yeah.
I said, mercy. Is it that much to this stuff? And this was before I could play the horn worth crap. And I found that to be real impressive. So when I really got turned on seeing some guys play, I always kept that to the forefront of my mind. And now that I've gotten as deep into it as knowing how things are really related, because I know that some of these players, as I hear them play, don't know much about this theory I just shared with you. In fact, there's a guy wanting me to help put a book together for teachers and the average teacher teaching in a formal institution to come up with some books that can help the teacher. If he doesn't have the experience that I have as playing, how can he get these kids to a level where they can grow beyond him? So I've been thinking about it, but I don't think formal institutions work for me as well. Because people want to stay with whatever curriculum has been devised. And if it's working for you, keep it. But if it's not, get rid of it or do something else. See, I don't think we should hold everybody's feet to the fire about the way music is generally approached in formal institutions.
Because you're taking away some creativity. You could be right.
Right. So if you're looking for things to grow, that's the first place you need to attack, is the formal institutions. Because see, now that things are getting shifted around again, you got people coming in. You got some people coming in that don't like jazz. And any way they can undermine it, they will. Because it's not what they can do. And I can imagine it's not fun trying to teach something you don't know anything about.
Well, you shouldn't be teaching it if you don't know it. Teach something you know, right? It's kind of like getting up on stage and not knowing the tune. Well,
but look how many years we've had people doing that. Like all these state bands, like I said once before, all state bands, you had people in some of these small towns heading up all state bands in jazz that couldn't play jazz to save their own life. But yet they get to pick and choose who they think is good. And what they find they do is pick people they think read a little better than another. Because that saves them time. If a guy can read pretty well, and an ensemble can sound like a solid group, let's go with
and they look better too.
Yeah.
Right.
And then, you know, I look at kids who have some creative talent that don't get picked. You know, I've been around to see that.
Mm.
Taking my son and his friends, several of my sons, to some of these all-state band auditions, and I get there and find, you know, I'm a strange bird because certain things I see the average person can't see, certain things I feel the average person can't feel. I can almost look at a musician and walk in a room and tell you whether he can play or not by the way he walks in the room and carries his horn.
Mm. Yeah. So all these schools, you're talking primarily grade school or high school?
Yeah.
Because when you
That's
correct,
been going on for a long time.
And so that's definitely far from being corrected. I mean, and which is why you're doing what you're doing down at the Hall of Fame, which is a great thing because it's almost more of a mentorship type thing that's going on there, where you've got you teaching theory and Jose teaching trumpet and or whoever. I don't even know how many people there's down there now. Your wife teaches piano, right?
Right.
So that kind of thing goes a long way for these kids, I think. I mean, to me, that would be a grand opportunity for these younger kids to learn something that they're not going to get in school.
Right. Well, however, we take all kinds, even somebody beginning, you know. So everybody's not, the hardest thing is that everybody's not on the same level.
So it's,
but for me, it doesn't matter. Because I will simplify and break things down, but still give them some challenge and things to do that they still have to practice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean for it to be overwhelming, but almost everybody is scared that I get too heavy dealing with theory with it. But if you don't start soon enough, everything seems complicated.
Yeah, it gets harder. I mean, I find myself trying to learn more, and it takes more effort to like really sit down and
especially when you become an adult, don't have the time, you got responsibilities of all kind, and you
get
know,
mother young.
Yeah, I still work with older musicians because I feel for them. If they all of a sudden say were into sports, now they still want to play a horn at 60 or 70 years of age. I don't turn them away.
Yeah. Well, I just bought a saxophone. So I've been playing guitar, but I just bought it. And sound like I'm chasing a goose around the house right now. But you're never I say you're never too old to learn and do something. Now you might only get to a certain level, but hey, you do what you can do. Yeah. Right. Now when it comes to colleges, this is something I find interesting because right now I would say that the colleges are with all these jazz programs. There are a ton of them now. New York, Boston, you got Berkeley College and College of Music and all these. And from the musicians I talked to a lot of them on this YouTube channel, and they say that they think that right now that formal education is probably the best it's ever been in the college side of things, where they learn the theory, they're able to play with people, they learn at a high level technically, and they can technically play their instruments very well. So they seem to think that that's at a high level of technically playing, but that doesn't. The mentorship thing has to still come into play. So in other words, you come out of college and you can play your horn technically well, doesn't mean you can play jazz well. Doesn't mean that. And so this mentorship thing, to me, goes like what you guys are doing. But this has to also be on the level of these college level kids that are coming out that are able to go see George Coleman, maybe learn something from George Coleman playing saxophone, or now these other guys are getting older. Branford Marsalis, Wynton Marsalis, these guys are teaching. So what do you see as far as this mentorship thing? Because without that, I think jazz dies, is it not? Without this connection, that's this lineage that keeps getting handed on. Do you think it dies without that? Without people picking up the torch?
So you think has really gotten the torch right now to pass it on to somebody?
Well, there's a lot of good people. I think that Winton does a good job of education. I think he's at a pretty high level. I think his brother Branford, I think he's at a pretty high level. A great player and can play. You know, I saw him in concert. He can play anything from 30s all the way up to now. I mean, very well. Those are just two examples. Of course, they're the two most popular. I think Eric Alexander, a wonderful saxophone player. There's quite a few. I think those guys aren't quite, I think, up to the age of because they're in their mid to upper 50s. Now some of these other guys like Winton and those guys are getting a bit, you know, into their 60s, and so there's a responsibility, I guess is what I'm saying. There's these guys that are successful, they're good players, they're playing good jazz, making good albums that they have to pass on, because a lot of these guys like Eric Alexander learned from George Coleman. Right. And so he got that stuff handed on to him, and he's kind of done his own thing with it. He's one of the top level guys, and eventually guys like him, maybe not necessarily him, but guys like him are going to have to turn around and do the same thing to the younger guys that are coming up behind them. Without that, does jazz die, I guess is my question, because it seems like it does.
Well, hopefully they're all doing that now, if they can help somebody at all, you know, with whatever they know. They're doing that. But I don't know how much faith I put in that. I'm hoping it's still going to be around. But I find a lot of young guys, like, they come to the sessions, don't even ask questions.
Right, which...
You know, but you got to have a love and a hunger. And, you know, everybody comes in like, and I hear that a lot of older musicians in New York, older than you named, feel that way about a lot of young upstarts coming on the scene. That's been coming on the scene for the last 10 or 20 or 30 years. Haven't been asking questions. They just come up there like, you know, they feel like they can do as much as anybody has ever done.
Right. I mean, Louis Hayes, he's playing. I mean, you still have some of these guys you still have these living legends right now that are playing. They're still those guys, but those guys are going to be gone soon, and you're going to have another group of people. But I think asking the questions, being interested in learning, because if you don't, there's somebody I interviewed, and I can't remember who it was, but they're like, if you don't ask these guys, they're not going to tell you. You need to be interested in, and you need to go up and ask and find out this wisdom, and that
Right.
Otherwise, so
that's what I like to say. I've gone to too many workshops of top musicians, and when the kids get in the room around these musicians, the questions they ask is, what was it like being on the road, traveling with so and so and so? Nothing musical.
Right.
So, did you have fun doing this, that, and the other? You know, what was Italy like? You know, well, you're going to see one day when you go over there. You get your horn together, you be over there in Italy yourself to find out what it's like over there. You know, meanwhile, if you're trying to get there, you know, ask the guy about something that's going to help you go back and practice so you can play your acts better in the next couple of weeks. But it's like kids aren't being taught what to ask, you know, or they just don't know what to ask.
And so here's I guess, when it comes to these colleges, because again, I think these students are probably well educated with what they're getting taught, but is it, you think there's a lot more, from what I hear, there's a lot more people that are wanting to play jazz now, a lot more students, a lot more that come out of the schools that want it, and there's not enough places to play. Obviously not everybody's on the same level as a musician, but if you don't have, if you already think you know everything, I guess is so. I think is there a competitive? Do you think there's a competitiveness where it's almost like, well, if I ask a question about this, I'm going to look like an idiot. You know, there's a lot of people that are like that. They're afraid in the classroom to ask questions. They're going to look like I don't know as much as, you know, because it's a kind of a pride thing, or or competitive nature, where it's like, well, if I go to a jam session and I don't get up and play on that tune that everybody knows, well, I better go ahead and get up there and play on it anyway, and just try to do something, right? So
I think, let's see, now that I blame on some of the people hosting sessions. Some people are host a session and they don't want to be caught in a moment of weakness. You know, because it's hard to know every tune. I'm not in the shape I used to be some 30, 40 years ago when I was trying to know every tune that anybody could call. But I wasn't doing anything but practicing and trying to play for a living. And if I wasn't able to play for a living, I was doing some hokey job that I knew I wasn't going to be doing the rest of my life. I was just putting some ends together so I could still do what I wanted to do. But, you know, what happens is a lot of people, the way they run a session, run it like a gig.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be careful of that too. And so you keep shaming people that they should know the melody. They'll come up here if you don't know the melody. It's supposed to be a jam session, but then you calling everything you know without allowing them to call something they know.
Mm-hmm.
That's another problem. So you're going to have some people trying to do what they can't do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I usually don't do that. I don't care how simple the tune is. I don't care if I'm tired of hearing it. You know, and I've got caught up with this with some club owners who were still good friends of mine. You know, you are working the club. You are paying me to host this. Don't come up here trying to tell me what tunes you don't want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them I don't want to hear either. But
Right.
if that's all they know and they can do their best on it, that's what I'm going to let them play.
Right.
You know what I mean? And, you know, so if a person runs a jam session and is too strict, they might not see me but so often now.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Because I don't mind. I know we got to work together to keep this thing going and sharing with each other. I'm all about doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not all about trying to hype you up individually just because you got a jam session.
Right.
You know. No, I say be fair. See, I don't when I ran sessions in New York and Atlanta, I didn't have to do no talking. I didn't do that much talking.
Yeah.
You know, it was everybody knew how to carry themselves
Yeah.
based on how I was carrying myself and allowing people, they saw that I was trying to be fair with everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, when you do that, everything can almost take care of itself. One
Right.
day, we may even learn that a real democracy is supposed to be like that. One day we're going to learn.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we have a real democracy yet.
No. No.
No.
So the jam set, however, okay, so I mean, talking about ours here in Birmingham, which I really enjoy going to. I think Jose, for the most part, does a pretty good job at running it.
Yeah, I think he does too.
He tries to keep it a certain standard. He lets the young guys come up and play. If he doesn't know the tune, he'll even sit down.
That's right.
I don't know
That's
it.
right. I've seen him do that. Now, how many people do
Yeah.
that? Not many people who do that.
Now, but he talks about the guys that he came up under were way more strict than he is, because I mean, he'll say something to you, he's nice about it. But he said that, the people that he came up on, they take the horn out of your hand in front on stage, or some of these guys. Or one other guy told me a story in New York. Who was it? It was Eddie Lockjaw Davis. They call him the enforcer at the jam session. And then if you can play, you got to throw you off. Not literally throw you off, but tell you get off the stage. So I think that's kind of interesting. What are your experiences? Did you have any experiences like that where they was kind of rough? Like he would talk about Cleve. Those guys didn't play around. You don't practice on.
Well, not being from here, yeah, I didn't know Cleve on that level. But I enjoyed playing with Cleve when I got here. I've had an experience, naturally, when you're starting out, nobody's that great starting out,
Right.
Unless they're a prodigy of some sort.
Right.
But I knew guys that were like that too. I had an incident like that as for myself, where a guy invited me to come up and play, and then he didn't like what I called. He didn't like the way I was playing it. And so he snatched my horn from my playing position,
Oh,
shoved it in my chest, told me to get the heck out the club. Believe me, when it's that bold and that brazen, you want to retaliate.
yeah, I guess.
I wanted to pick up the mic stand and clobber it, but I didn't do that. I said, well, I'm going to take this. I know I should have called a better tune than this, but that's okay. So he was a big Woody Shaw fan. At the time, I was a big Freddie Hubbard fan. So I went back, shared it real good, started taking everything to the keys. I think it was that incident that might have driven me to a point of drive and almost beyond just daily practice. I would practice for hours at a time. I'd almost get mad if somebody called me about a gig if they called me in the middle of my practice.
So it made you more serious about it.
Oh,
Which you hear that often, right? That it's something, an experience like that, even though it's unpleasant, but that it's like, okay, I'm going to take this.
It can provide you with the kind of drive that you need, if you're going to do it. Now, if you get your lip stuck out about it too much and the experience is so bad, you say,
I'm throwing it down.
I'm throwing it down. Then it wasn't for you to start with, I guess.
Yeah, that's how serious are you? How really?
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the mentality. At least I'm guessing that.
But I don't like to.
I don't do that. Yeah.
I'm a little more brazen right when I meet you. If you don't know what questions to ask, I'm gonna ask you some.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I've just about treated everybody here in Birmingham. What do you know about this? What do you know about that? Well, if you don't know enough about this, don't you think you should ask somebody something about it? What school did you go to?
Yeah.
So they subject not to like me from the start.
Yeah.
Until they learn something about me.
Yeah.
He really ain't that bad.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know this if he hadn't
right.
done this, that, and other.
And I'm wondering if that's kind of how some of these guys that kind of did that kind of stuff, at least some of them, they were like, well, let's see how serious how thick of a skin does this guy have? He's going to be able to stick with it. You think some of those people were thinking that?
I'm sure they were.
And they're like, okay, well,
yeah,
this was
most certainly were.
It
but
was,
the other hand, they can probably see that like I can, that the student is in need of important information.
Yeah.
It's a strange type of thing, but it depends upon how far one wants to go and how they want to express themselves.
Yeah. What level they want to.
Yeah.
Right now, as far as jazz goes, first of all, I want to hear something about your favorite players, because I definitely want to hear, who your favorite players to listen to are, whether they're now or the people that you knew or what have you. What are some of your favorite records and favorite? I know you play the horn, primarily trumpet, but you play piano. But what are some of your favorites, jazz musicians of all time? I guess.
Well, of course, Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. I'll probably always name them first.
Mm-hmm.
Because I keep studying them. I don't look at when they came on the scene. I'm so far removed from that. There's some people don't think they need to go back and really study that stuff. And they certainly don't know how much I know about it because I'm much older and I don't have the facility I used to have. But I keep, even when I have to be off my horn, I work hard to build myself back up. But I still study. I still go back and look at some things that didn't make as much sense to me at the time I looked at it that makes more sense to me now. There's a tune, and this is where networking with each other helps. I became interested in studying this tune a little deeper after Jose told me he had a hard time memorizing it. And I said, well, it is a strange line on this tune. That's an old tune that Charlie Parker, and you know that's one of the greatest contributions of Charlie Parker is writing bebop heads to standard tunes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just about everything, you know. See, that's what I'm talking about. That's creativity right there. You know, so he didn't say, well, this was always a corny tune. I didn't want to hear this but so much. He just turned around and take a tune that if you said you loved it, then he might go back. I mean, you mad if you told, this is a beautiful tune. Maybe he didn't think so, but he'd go back and take that tune and work it, see if he can come up with something he liked on it. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. And so, but that also helped give structure and a methodology to bebop, you see. So, and this is some thinking, good creative thinking. So I look at the line on what tune used to be called Whispering. What is this? Jizzy's take on this. I think Jizzy wrote this tune. But they both played it. Groove and I.
Yeah.
Da-da, da-da. Sha-da-bee-dee-ba-da-ba-dee-ba-doo-bee-dee-da-dee-da. Now that line, like I explained the diminished chord to you, that line on that dominant, when you get to it, is flipping back, alternating quite evenly between the two whole tone scales. And you got, if you pay attention to intervals, you can catch it right away.
Interesting. So there's a lot to learn from those two guys. I mean, obviously, everybody calls them the legends, and but so, how much have we?
Now, when I hear some of these new guys, I don't hear that they're anywhere near that. So that's why my question to you is, who really has the torch?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of good players, but
there's
on the level, of a Charlie. Is there a new Charlie Parker?
Who has the torch?
Yeah, and how many of those legends do you have in any genre of music? Well,
yeah. How organized is, thinking about all the guys you named, who really has the torch?
Yeah. Good question. I one of my big things is supporting the working jazz musicians. That's one of my favorite things to do.
Well, that's a good thing to do.
Because, I think for me, the last thing I want to see is jazz I mean, I don't think it'll ever die. I really don't. But
we have to be worried about it because
there's
a lot of people who feel like they can do without it.
Yeah, and that's not
good.
We can't have that.
No.
So, well, man,
and I appreciate people like you too.
Well, it's a passion for me.
Yeah.
And I just have.
I can see that.
The most, to me, jazz. Going back to this whole thing, why jazz is the greatest music. Let's sum it up here because.
Oh yeah, I do. And I enjoy hearing everybody play.
Yeah, this whole idea though of musicians coming together to have a conversation.
But we should have that we should have the opportunity to do it more.
Mm.
You know, and no matter how many accolades any one person gets, this could be good for all.
Right. We need more places to play. We need
More
more jazz
places
clubs.
to play,
No one comes down
more
here.
musicians working with each other, no matter what level you perceive them to be on. More jazz musicians sharing ideas with each other. You know, you can't have too many ideas.
Right.
There's no such thing.
And now with YouTube and all this stuff, you do have a lot of these guys that do share things on videos, which is nice, but it's not the same as having that one-on-one discussion or playing together one-on-one and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so here in Birmingham, for me, we still can't get even national jazz acts down here in Birmingham. I mean, we'll get Alice Stevens Center, you'll get Samara Joy, one of these bigger artists, fabulous singer, but you'll never see these other guys that are very good. Eric Alexander, for example, or any of these. You'll never see them in Birmingham because there's no place to play, or people don't know who they are. And so I think the problem is we don't have still. With these smaller, first of all, the big record labels, they're all putting out all the old stuff, which we all love, the old Blue Note stuff, all this stuff, all that stuff's being put back out again. The records, the reissues. So you get the Art Blakey stuff, you get the Lee Morgan stuff, which is all great. We all want to hear it. But my point is that there's no promotion behind jazz from any big money, anything that's going to really push this forward. You got Verve, you get, like I said, Samara Joy, she came, you get that at a bigger place. But where's the medium-sized jazz club where you can bring in all these people and where they can actually go from city to city and play in these clubs? It's very difficult for these jazz musicians to make a living.
Yeah, it is. It's gotten worse, in fact. But we might have to start developing some committees of people who don't mind donating.
Right.
And if it comes to us having to rent or work out some bargain with the Allen Stevenson Center, you know, we have to get a community group to come in.
That's true, yeah. And you can do the old way, rent out a hall, fund it yourself, and bring them in, fly them in for a show and promote it. Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely something that could be done more. We're not doing it. We're not doing it. So, anything else you want to talk about? I mean, I could sit here and talk to you forever.
I can sit here and talk to you forever because that's how much I love the music.
Yeah.
And all the guys that, you know, Sam Rivers, you've heard me mention him a couple of times. I've always liked observing Sam from a distance. You know, he was doing for Downbeat. You haven't had that shirt on. It reminded me of Sam doing the listening thing on Downbeat. And they asked him about this guy, that guy. He said, how many stars would you give this guy? 10 stars. Give him 10 stars. What about this guy over here? 10 stars. Sam, everybody can't be 10 stars. They said, why not? Are they trying to play the music? 10 stars. That's the way I feel about it.
Yeah. Encourage people to play.
Yeah,
encourage people to play.
You know, and let them know that you know, because I think we're at a time now in life where there's too much criticizing each other, you know, and we're not really sure if we know any more than the person we criticize. You know.
Yeah.
But we all most definitely should be helping each other out.
Yeah.
That's how things are going to get straightened out and get better. You know, it's not going to be no one single person that does it. You know, you can forget that.
Yeah.
You know?
Is there going to be another Charlie Parker? Is there going to be another Diz? Is there going to be another one of these guys that's going to really change the face? I mean, of jazz. I mean, one guy I love it I think is Charles Lloyd. Of course, he's now a legend.
Yeah.
He's on Blue Note, and then, of course I think he's been one of the innovators because he's been playing. I think he's what age? He's like 90 years old now. He's still playing. But and I would consider him probably to be a pretty significant figure in jazz, that pretty big innovator that kind of went off and kind of did his own kind of thing. But how many people are there like that are really doing something where they kind of have steered the direction, maybe, into different realms, if you will. And he's not the only one. Yeah, you can name some other guys that have done similar things, but I mean, he's just an example of a guy that's had a long legacy. Kind of, in the '60s, kind of had that integrating that avant-garde kind of stuff, but still kind of had that traditional feel. But
yeah, well, you still have to have, time periods are different. So, Charlie Parker, we talking about another place and time.
Right.
And a lot of people, like you said, he still met with criticism. But, as people kept looking at how he was doing what he was doing, a lot of people got on board with it. They didn't like it at first. So, it's one of those things that's hard to speak on because, there are fertile time periods where all of a sudden he's the right person
right
at the right time.
And that's no one can predict that. So, well, I think it will still happen, but all right. Well, I'll sign off. This has been great. I'll have to have you back again, and
I've enjoyed it
just a
immensely.
lot of wisdom. And I think another interesting thing that I've kind of picked up is the observation of these musicians. In other words, it's one thing to, I think, copy something or learn a solo or transcribe it, but it's another thing to observe,
pick it apart and
analyze it, really know everything back and forth. How many people are maybe some of these students are doing, I know a lot of the students transcribe, they'll transcribe tunes. They talk about that a lot, these younger jazz musicians, but how many are really diving into these and picking it apart and analyzing it and then saying, oh, you know what, I'm going to take that and maybe go off in a little bit of a different direction. Do you think that's maybe not happening enough? This observation,
I don't think it's happening enough.
And there's an art to that too, right?
It really is. You have to. That's where it's so important to know the fundamentals of the way things work. And like I tell people, every note of the scale has meaning. Every note of any scale has particular meaning. And, so when you look at something, just like I told you about that line on Groovin' High, those two whole tone scales, and what made me pay attention to that is that the grouping of the notes gave itself away. When I look at, he did a whole step here, but when he got to this thing, he decided to have some contrast. So now here's a natural skip being put in that's still based on a whole tone scale, And that kind of analyzing, that's tedious.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to do
Yeah, right.
Just like transcribe, you have to salute somebody who's going to listen to all this stuff and transcribe it in the first place.
Right.
But that's only half the battle. After you transcribe all that, then you got to study it. It's, so now it's a lot of guys being helpful, trying to put out transcriptions. There's several guys I'd like to meet that I haven't met, like that are real strong on the internet, doing some wonderful things. They put out transcriptions, and some of them you can download for free. Uh, Back at the time when I was looking at it, Jeff Hegelson, I think, is a trumpet player that has a nice site, and but just like the Omni book, you can go by that. Not that it's thoroughly correct, because you still need to be listening to the recordings.
Right.
You see.
Which that's something that I think is lost, because when you have all these playlists, you can listen to a whole bunch of stuff, but how much are you really getting? In other words, I can go listen to 50 different trumpet players on a playlist.
Yeah.
But if I go sit down and look at, Diz or, Art Farmer, like you're talking about, any of these guys and you sit down and you listen to that record over and over again, one record or one tune.
Yeah.
And you really get into that and I think that's definitely, I think, is going away, and that needs to come back.
Yeah, it does need to come back.
So.
And I don't think even some of the great players that you're naming, I'm not sure if all of them have done enough of that.
Yeah.
And I'm basing that on the things I've heard some other players do. But a lot of just the organization of some things, the way that it's organized.
Mm-hmm.
See, that has to be discovered still by some folk.
All right. Well, we'll sign off for this episode. Maybe we can do another one when you got some time. But yeah, man, there's a lot we could discuss. This is an endless topic. That's why I love.
It is.
There's a lot we can dive into. There's a